Wyoming Territory, August 1874. The wind howled low through the pines as the sun broke over the jagged Bighorn Mountains, throwing gold light across a trail gone half to dust. A rider came up slow through the trees, his coat torn, his horse lathered, and his jaw set like stone. His name was Xander Finch, and he had not meant to find anyone out here. But he did. She was crouched by the cold ash of a dead fire, her skirts torn, her hair tangled, and her arms wrapped around a little girl with a face too pale and eyes too wide. The woman looked up when she heard the hoofbeats. Her body tensed, one hand clutching a rusted kitchen knife, the other holding the child behind her. "I do not want trouble," she said, her voice hoarse and dry. "Just go on." Xander dismounted slow, keeping his hands where she could see them. "You have a child," he said, nodding toward the girl. "And no fire. You will not last the night." The woman said nothing. The girl pressed tighter to her side. "I have coffee. A biscuit left," he added. "You can have it." He took the wrapped biscuit from his saddlebag and held it out. The girl took a step forward. The woman caught her arm. "Clara, no. Clara." The name struck something in Xander's chest. He did not know what. "I do not mean you harm," he said again. "Name's Xander Finch. I am heading south, but I can help you as far as you need." The woman stared at him a long time before she spoke. "Keziah Nolan," she said. "That is my daughter, Clara, and I have nowhere to go." Xander crouched and passed the biscuit to the child. "You are not alone now," he said. They rode out together 2 hours later, after he helped her gather what little she had: a threadbare blanket, a dented tin pot, a bundle of clothes. She had been walking for days, she said. Her boots had holes. Clara had a cough. The girl was only 5, and the heat had taken most of her strength. Xander gave Keziah his canteen and let Clara ride in front of him. He said little, but he watched her as she tried not to cry when her daughter fell asleep against his chest. She was proud, that much was clear, but she was tired down to the bone. They made camp that night in a grove of cottonwood trees beside a creek. Xander built a fire, boiled coffee, gave Clara the last of his dried apples. Keziah sat nearby, her eyes never leaving her daughter. "I was married," she said quietly, once the girl had fallen asleep. "We had a farm near Buffalo. He left, took our savings, the mule, and half the grain. Said he was going west. Never came back." Xander poked at the fire with a stick. "How long ago?" "For months. I held on as long as I could. Sold everything little by little. Then the landlord came. Said if I could not pay, I had to go." He nodded. "You have family?" "No one left." He looked across the fire at her, the flames catching the edge of her cheek. "You could have begged." Keziah held herself straighter. "I would rather starve." Xander stood and crossed to his saddlebag. He pulled out the last biscuit, wrapped in cloth, and came back to kneel beside her. "You and that child," he said, unwrapping it carefully, "are the only riches I need." He broke it in half and held it out to her. "Take it." Her lips parted, eyes wide. She took it slow, like it might disappear. "You do not even know us." "I know enough." She stared at him for a long time. Then her eyes softened, and her shoulders dropped. "Thank you," she whispered. They shared the biscuit in silence, the fire between them. When the stars came out, she wrapped Clara in the blanket and laid her down near the fire. Xander stood watch, rifle across his lap. Keziah did not sleep much, but when she did, she dreamed of warm hands and a voice that said they were safe now. The next morning, Clara laughed for the first time. She splashed in the creek while Xander cleaned his saddle. Keziah watched from a distance, her arms folded, but her lips curved at the edges. "You are good with her," she said later as they rode. "I had a sister. Raised her after our folks died. She was not much older than Clara when it happened. What happened to her? Fever. 2 winters ago. Keziah looked over at him. I am sorry. He shrugged. I am just glad I was there to hold her hand. They were quiet after that. But it was not an empty silence. It was the kind that fills when words are not needed. That night they found an abandoned line shack. The roof held and there was a stove. Xander chopped wood while Keziah boiled beans. Clara played with a pine cone like it was a treasure. Keziah watched him as he carried the wood inside, his shirt damp with sweat, his face streaked with soot. Why are you helping us? She asked, not for the first time. Xander looked at her, then at Clara. Because I want to. She nodded slowly, like she was still learning how to believe that. They stayed 2 more nights. On the 3rd, Clara came down with fever. Keziah panicked, holding her daughter close, whispering prayers. Xander rode out before dawn and came back with willow bark and a bottle of laudanum he had traded for at a trapper's camp. She will be all right, he said, sitting beside them. I have seen worse. Keziah looked down at him as he held a damp cloth to Clara's forehead. You are not who I expected to find out here. He smiled just a little. Neither are you. That night, Clara's fever broke. Keziah cried quietly while Xander sat beside her, his hand on her back. We will head south tomorrow, he said. There is a town near Cheyenne. I know a woman who runs a boarding house. She will give you a room. Keziah looked up at him, her eyes tired but bright. And you? He hesitated. If you want me to stay, I will. She said nothing for a long time. Then she reached for his hand and held it tight. Stay. They reached the town of Chugwater 5 days later, riding in slow with dust on their boots and the sun behind them. The prairie had burned beneath August skies, leaving the air dry and the grass brittle underfoot. Clara leaned against Xander's chest, quiet, her fever long gone but her energy not yet returned. Keziah rode beside them, her eyes on the road, her hands steady on the reins. Her dress was cleaner than it had been, thanks to a stream and a bar of lye soap Xander had bartered off a passing prospector. But the hem still bore the wear of hard miles. The boarding house stood at the far end of town, set back from the main road, past the livery and the smithy. Its porch sagged slightly, but the paint was fresh, and the curtains in the windows were clean. A woman in a dark shawl stepped out as they approached. Her hair was streaked with gray and pinned high, and her eyes passed over the little group with brisk warmth. You're late, she said to Xander, folding her arms. I set aside the south room 2 days ago. Had cause to travel slower, he replied. The woman's gaze flicked to Keziah and Clara. I see that. Bring them in. I'll get the stove going. Keziah hesitated at the door, taking in the neat parlor and the scent of yeast bread rising. Clara clung to her skirts, her thumb in her mouth. You can set her on the settee, the woman said, already moving toward the kitchen. Name's Eliza. I fed your cowboy here more than once, so I know he doesn't keep bad company. Xander helped them settle but didn't linger. He stepped out again and went to tend the horses, leaving Keziah with bread and a shallow dish of honey. Clara dozed with her head in her mother's lap, her cheeks flushed with sleep but not fever. Later, when the sun had dropped low, Keziah stepped onto the porch, brushing her hands on her apron. She found Xander seated on the steps, a knife in one hand, whittling curls off a block of soft pine. She's sleeping easy, Keziah said. He looked up, nodding once. I haven't had a roof that wasn't leaking in near a year, she said after a moment. Feels strange. You'll get used to it. She sat beside him, careful not to touch. Eliza said you helped her once. Her boy got caught in a fence wire during a blizzard. I was passing through, pulled him free before frostbite set in. He didn't look at her, just kept scraping slow arcs from the wood. Why'd you stop? she asked, voice low. He paused. You mean traveling? She nodded. He set the knife down on his knee. I've been on the move since I was 16. Didn't think I'd stop unless I was forced to. And now, he met her eyes for the first time since they'd sat. I'm thinking maybe I wasn't forced, just found something worth staying for. She didn't answer right away. The wind shifted, bringing the scent of cut hay and distant smoke. A dog barked somewhere down the road. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I can clean, she said softly. Cook, mend, keep books if the numbers aren't too high. Eliza could use help. I'm not asking for charity. No, he said. You're offering work, and I reckon that's what she'll see too. She looked toward the street, quiet a long time. Clara asked if you were her new pa, she said finally. Xander's breath caught, just faint, but enough. What did you say? He asked. I told her no, Keziah said, her voice steady. Not yet. He turned to her, the last of the sun catching the edge of her face. Means you didn't say never. She didn't smile, but her voice softened. I'm tired of never. I want something that lasts. I don't leave things half done, he said. They sat until the stars came out, neither of them moving. When Keziah stood, she touched his hand for the first time, just a brush of fingers, but it was enough to set something steady between them. Inside, Clara murmured in her sleep. Keziah pulled the blanket higher and watched her daughter for a long moment. Then she stood at the window and looked down at Xander, still sitting on the steps below. He didn't see her. He was looking out at the dark, the knife laid beside him, the curls of wood at his feet. She turned back to Clara, whispered something low, and laid down beside her. In the morning, she'd speak to Eliza, make herself useful, see what work needed doing. And maybe, when the time was right, she'd take Xander's hand again and not let go. The first frost came early that year, edging the window panes of the boarding house with lace before September had fully settled. Keziah stood in the kitchen with her sleeves rolled, her hands deep in flour as she worked dough into shape. The wood stove crackled behind her, scenting the room with heat and ash. Outside, Clara played in the yard with a boy from the mercantile, her laughter drifting through the open door. Eliza leaned against the table, peeling apples with easy rhythm. You settle quick, she said, slicing another strip of skin into the basin. Some women take months to come back to themselves. Keziah didn't look up. I had to. You got plans. I'm not sure yet, she said, brushing flour from her wrist. But I know I want to earn my keep. You already do. That girl of yours is steadier. And Xander's been sleeping like a man who finally stopped running. Keziah pressed her thumb into the dough, shaping it by feel alone. He stays because he wants to. I never asked. Eliza let the apple core fall into the bucket. No, but you didn't send him off neither. That night, after supper and chores were done, Xander took a lantern to the barn. Keziah followed a few minutes later, brushing her hands dry on her apron. She found him brushing down the mare, his back turned, his shoulders moving slow and steady. You always come out here last? She asked, voice low. He nodded, not turning. Horses don't ask questions, but they don't lie either. She stepped closer, her boots quiet over the packed earth. I think Clara wants to stay here, for good. She doesn't say it, just sleeps deeper, smiles more. She's got a chance to be a child here, he said, hanging the brush on the hook. That matters. Keziah reached for a bale of hay and sat, folding her hands in her lap. I don't know how to build a future. I only ever kept one from falling apart. He stood quiet a moment, then crossed the barn slowly and sat beside her. The lantern cast a warm ring around them, catching on the dust in the air. You don't need to build it all at once, he said. Just lay one stone steady, then the next. She looked at him, her eyes steady. What if I want to build it with you? He didn't speak right away. His hand was rough when it found hers, slow and sure. Then that's the only stone I've been waiting on. Later, when they walked back toward the house, the sky was full of stars, and the cold clung to their skin. Clara had fallen asleep curled on a quilt near the fire, her thumb tucked under her chin. Keziah bent and lifted her gently, carrying her to the narrow bed in their room. Xander stood in the doorway watching. Your hands don't shake anymore, he said. They used to. First night I met you, they trembled just holding a tin cup. She laid the quilt over Clara and turned to him. And what do they do now? He stepped forward and took her hands in his. They hold everything I didn't know I needed. Keziah didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her fingers curled around his, and the silence between them was full. The next morning, he went into town early and came back with a length of blue calico and a carved wooden comb. He handed them to Keziah without a word, and she looked down at the cloth, her throat thick with something she didn't know how to name yet. I never had pretty things, she said, voice hushed. Now you do, he said. You and that child are the only riches I need. She looked up at him then, and something settled in her eyes. Not surprise, not disbelief. Just a quiet knowing that she'd found what she hadn't dared to hope for. They spent the afternoon fixing the broken porch rail, Clara handing up nails one by one. By nightfall, the wind had calmed. Keziah sat on the steps with her daughter in her lap, Xander beside them, his arm resting behind her shoulders, not quite touching but close. We're not running anymore, she said softly. No, he murmured. We're home. By late October, the wind had begun to bite. The cottonwoods behind the boarding house dropped their last leaves in slow spirals, and the mornings came edged in white. Xander had taken on work helping the livery owner repair a collapsed stall roof. Keziah kept busy in the kitchen and with the house ledgers, and Clara had taken to following Eliza from room to room with a rag doll Keziah had sewn from old flour sackcloth. One afternoon, Clara sat at the edge of the porch scraping the ground with a stick, her knees dirt-streaked and her braid loose. Xander rode into the yard, his coat dusted in sawdust, and tied his gelding to the post. He paused, watching her. You guarding the house? He asked, setting his hat on the rail. Mama said I'm not to wander, Clara replied, squinting up at him. But I can be a lookout. She's wise, he said. I'd rather have you scouting than half the men I've known. Clara beamed, then turned back to her drawing. Inside, Eliza passed through the front room with a basin of linens. Keziah emerged from the kitchen carrying a folded towel, brushing a damp curl from her cheek. You're late, she said, her voice lighter than it used to be. Had to fetch a load of pine from the ridgeline, Xander answered. They pay extra for hauling. She stepped down onto the porch beside him, the towel still in her hand. There's soup on the stove. You've time to eat before evening chores. I was hoping you'd say that. She studied him for a moment, then nodded toward the barn. There's something else you should see. He followed her without question. The light was thin inside, filtering through the loose boards. At the far end stood a small table, low to the ground, with a square of muslin stretched across it. On the cloth lay a pair of leather soles and a cut of wool too small for a coat. I've been saving scraps, Keziah said, brushing her fingers over the wool. Clara's outgrown her shoes, and I can make her a pair if I can shape the leather right. You'll need a last, Xander said, crouching beside the table. I've got one in my saddlebag, same size as her foot. Belonged to my sister. Keziah looked at him, her hand pausing. You kept it. Couldn't part with it. I didn't know why then. He met her eyes. I do now. She swallowed, then leaned down and picked up one of the soles. I'm not used to having help. I want you to know I don't expect anything from you. What if I want to give it anyway? She turned to him, the shadows soft across her face. Then tell me why. He stood slowly. Because I want to see her run through spring grass without stumbling. Because you look at her like she's the one thing that matters most. Because when I wake up in the morning and hear her feet on the floorboards, it feels like I've got something to protect again. Keziah didn't speak. The quiet between them filled with the rustle of straw and the creak of the barn settling. I'm not a man with land or title, Xander said, but I've got hands and I've got time. And if you'll have me, I'll give you both. She stepped closer, her voice low. I don't want someone to save me. I don't aim to, he said. I want to stand beside you, not in front. She reached for his hand, her grip firm. Then stand here, with me. That night, they sat together on the porch after Clara had been tucked into bed, a quilt draped over both their knees. The lantern inside cast a soft glow through the window, and the town beyond lay quiet beneath a pale moon. Keziah leaned her head against Xander's shoulder. I used to think safety was something you bought. A roof, a lock, a full cupboard. And now I think it's a man who stays when the wind changes. He turned his face toward her hair, the scent of wood smoke and flour clinging to it. Then I'll stay. They didn't speak again that evening. They didn't need to. Together, they watched the stars settle over the prairie, the silence between them sturdy and warm. In the morning, Clara came padding out of her room, rubbing her eyes. She found Xander in the kitchen, ladling porridge into bowls, and climbed into the chair beside his. Are you staying forever? She asked. He glanced at Keziah, who stood at the stove in a soft blue dress she hadn't worn before. I aim to, he said. Clara grinned, and Keziah did not correct her. Not this time. Snow came mid-November, blanketing the town in silence. The roads turned to packed white, and the air sharpened. Keziah wrapped Clara in a shawl and walked her to the schoolhouse each morning, boots crunching through the frost-crusted lane. Xander repaired the porch steps with fresh pine, his breath clouding the air, his hands chapped from the cold. Inside the boarding house, Keziah had taken on full bookkeeping for Eliza, her figures neat, her notes meticulous. She kept the stove fed through the long afternoons and learned to bake with yeast instead of sour leaven, her bread rising warm and golden. Clara, faster now in her new shoes, returned home each day with red cheeks and stories about letters and numbers. She asked Xander to quiz her in the evenings while they shelled beans or peeled potatoes. He always did. One evening, Keziah stood by the window with her sewing basket, watching flurries drift past the glass. Xander leaned against the doorframe behind her, arms crossed. Are you content? He asked, voice low. She threaded her needle without turning. I've never known what that word felt like, but this might be it. He stepped closer. I want to speak to you about something. She glanced up, the needle paused in her fingers. I spoke with the preacher, he said. Asked if he'd marry us before winter deepens. He said yes. Keziah set the needle down in her lap. I know you're proud, he added. You've built a life here with your own hands. I don't want to take that from you. I want to add to it. She rose slowly, smoothing her skirt. I've been a wife before, but I've never been a partner. I never had someone who asked what I wanted. I'm asking now. She didn't answer right away. Then she took his hand and pulled it to her chest, placing it above her heart. If you marry me, you marry all the things that broke before I got here. I don't want a perfect woman, he said. I want you. They married the next Sunday, in the parlor beneath the lace curtain that Clara had helped Keziah wash clean. Eliza set out cider and biscuits, and the preacher from 2 towns over arrived by sleigh, his collar stiff against the wind. Clara stood beside them with a sprig of dried lavender in her hand and a grin stretched wide across her face. She wouldn't stop bouncing on her toes. Keziah wore the blue calico Xander had given her. She had added a white collar stitched with tiny violets. Her hair was pinned back, not fancy, but careful. Xander wore his cleanest shirt and the boots he'd resoled himself. He held her hand through the vows, his thumb brushing her knuckle once. Steady, sure. Afterward, they sat at the table together while Clara climbed into Xander's lap and fell asleep with her head tucked under his chin. Keziah watched them, her heart full in a way she hadn't thought possible. She reached across and touched his knee beneath the table. "You've given me more than you know," she said. "You gave it to yourself," he replied. "I only stood beside you while you did." That night, once Clara was tucked beneath her quilt and the house had gone quiet, Keziah and Xander lay beneath a single blanket in the room that had once been hers alone. Snow tapped lightly at the window, and the stove glowed in the corner. "I didn't think I'd ever have this again," she whispered. "You didn't have it before," he said. "Not like this." She pressed her forehead to his. "Then let's keep it." Through the long winter they did. Xander built a sled for Clara, and Keziah taught her to embroider. They saved every coin they could and bought a milk cow from a widow outside of town. In spring, the yard turned green and soft, and Keziah planted a garden. Xander helped her fence it, and Clara pressed seeds into the dirt with careful fingers. By midsummer, the house bustled. Keziah had begun teaching the younger boarders how to sew, and Xander had taken on carpentry jobs beyond the town limits, always returning home before supper. Clara caught frogs in the creek and brought them to Keziah in her apron, laughing until she hiccuped. One evening, as the sky bled orange through the clouds, Keziah and Xander sat on the back stoop, watching Clara chase fireflies. "She's grown taller," Keziah said, resting her head against his shoulder. "So have you," he murmured, "in all the ways that count." She turned her face toward him, her eyes soft. "You still glad you stayed?" He looked out at the yard, at the garden, the house, the girl with her arms upraised toward the blinking lights. "I never knew peace could look like this," he said. "But yes, I'm glad." Keziah reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together. "Then let's grow old here. Let's stay." And they did. For years to come, the porch held the sound of laughter and quiet conversation. The garden grew full each summer, and the house stood firm through storms and seasons. Clara came into her own with joy and mischief and the kind of steadiness that only grows from love freely given. Keziah never had to leave again. Xander never wanted to. And every evening, when the sky turned gold and the wind softened through the grass, they sat side by side, hands clasped, hearts still. Not waiting, just home.